Thank you, Cheryl. The title of my sermon today is Pray for Us. Pray for us. Pray. I'm not going to kid y'all, this is a heavy sermon. I mean, there's no stand-up comedy today, I'm sorry. But there's just not any room for it today in this message. It's just not. The title is taken from the ending words of our prayer today, the Ave Maria, which is also the words of Verdi's Ave Maria, which our soprano, Samina Islam, will sing right after the sermon. And I was set on that title and good to go with this whole kind of message until late last night. Just as I was about to turn off the computer and go to sleep, which was 6:30, because I'm an early bird. I'm kidding. Just listen, if y'all are listening here, come on, stay with me. Just as I was about to turn off the computer, I saw the news about the shooting in Jacksonville, Florida, late yesterday afternoon. I don't know if you've seen that news, but 3 black citizens were murdered with an AR-15 in a blatantly racially motivated hate crime. And this heinous act came on the same day as the 60th anniversary as the March on Washington and Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. When I read the news about Jacksonville last night, I came this close to changing the title of the sermon to One Nation Under Fire with Liberty and Justice for All. But then I decided that I'd stay with the sermon title because those ending words of that prayer, pray for us, pray, that's where I wanted to make my stand today. The violence in this country is so pervasive, there's nothing else we can do but immediately pray. It's so pervasive against so many people of so many backgrounds that a plea for prayer raised on our behalf by the mother of peace and love and healing, the mother of Christ, is perhaps the most important voice we need to hear right now. Pray for us. Pray for us. Pray. I mean, it's hard to even get my mind around the pain. I mean, maybe you guys feel this too. CNN recently reported that at the end of July of this year, just the end of July, the United States has surpassed 400 mass shootings in just this country. 400. We are on track for a record-breaking year in gun violence without any significant federal firearm legislation on the horizon. And you know what the number one cause of mass shootings is? The number one cause: domestic violence. Domestic violence. Nearly 70% of all mass shootings involve domestic violence. I mean, you might have seen just 4 days ago in Southern California, a retired Ventura police sergeant entered a bar where his estranged wife, with whom he's getting a divorce, was having dinner. He walks up to her, no greeting, no words, no warnings, shoots her point blank. Turns to her companion, shoots and kills her point blank. Then starts randomly shooting in the crowd, shooting and killing 3 more people, then goes back to his truck for a shotgun and a handgun, at which point the sheriffs shot him. I mean, this is just not a one-off. This is not one of those heinous things you read in the news and go, oh my gosh, that's horrible. We've never heard of that. This is like an occurrence that has happened over the entirety of human history. I mean, look at the Bible. Throughout ancient scriptures, you see women abused, enslaved, and attacked, and it's still going on. I mean, how about the 16th century with Shakespeare's play Othello? Or maybe 1887, when Verdi took this play and turned it into an opera based on the story which our Ave Maria, in a minute that will be performed, is based on. I mean, in the story, in the opera, an Italian general named Othello was manipulated by his underlings into believing that his wife Desdemona was having an affair. so he murders her. Later, he finds out she's innocent, and so he kills himself. Domestic murder, suicide. Sound familiar to any of the headlines? I mean, I can't help but think of the powerful lyrics that our own Jennifer Snowden, Bossy, her song today that she sung entitled The Fall of Eve. These words, wind was made for sailing, birds were meant to fly. Guess I was made for searching to find a reason why. I should long to taste a fruit that was never meant for me. Why? The purpose for the first of us was the curse of humanity. Pray for us. Pray for us. Pray. And if and when Mary does pray for us, you got to wonder what words she would use. I personally think that her prayer might sound a bit like that first line in Psalm 57. Have mercy on me, O God, have mercy. For in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I take refuge until the destroying storms pass by. The problem is that for thousands of years, those destroying storms of domestic violence have not passed by. And so while we ask for prayers on our behalf, in the meantime, we need to do something. Now, obviously, I can't stand up here and offer some kind of quick and easy solution for any kind of violence that's going on in our land, but I just want to suggest a few ideas. Because the first place to start with any problem is to acknowledge it exists. Let me share a tiny glimmer of the extent of this tragedy. Because as Christians and as human beings, we need to educate ourselves about this tragedy. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. 20 people per minute. So let's say this sermon is 18 minutes. Everybody's like, please, I hope. But let's say it's 18 minutes. In that time that it takes me to deliver this message, 360 people will be physically abused in this country. Right? That equates to more than 10 million a year. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been a victim of physical brutality by an intimate partner. On a typical day, there's more than 20,000 phone calls placed to domestic violence hotlines nationwide. This violence crosses ethnicity, it crosses race, it crosses income levels, and it crosses sexuality. It's not just the straight community that experiences this. Comparable stats are in the LGBTQ community as well. The world is groaning under the impact and cost of this epidemic of violence. I mean, think about this. In addition to the cost of life that we've just talked about, there's the $5.8 billion in medical costs stemming from this violence, or the 8 million days of paid work missed each year due to domestic violence. But these are just market costs. And while significant, the most important cost to focus on are ones we can't really quantify. The spiritual and ethical corrosion of our society, when physical and mental violence is overlooked, and perhaps the worst unquantifiable cost of all, the impact on our next generation. Each year, 10 million children are exposed to domestic violence, and a heartbreaking 90% of those are eyewitnesses who will feel that experience for the rest of their lives. First Lady Michelle Obama put it this way: we won't just be setting a bad example for our kids, but for our entire world. It's about basic human decency. It's about right and wrong, and we simply cannot endure this or expose our children to this any longer. Now is the time for all of us to stand up and say enough is enough. Pray for us. Pray for us. Pray. In the coming months, I'm going to be looking into some ways that MABC might get involved in the fight against not only domestic violence, but gun violence. One possibility is a group that I've read about called Guns to Gardens. And it is a nationwide group that buys back guns off the streets and through local artisans takes the disabled gun parts and creates garden tools for local municipal gardens, or for jewelry, or for art. Objects, they create objects that are life-giving from objects that are life-taking. The other project is our letter writing project. As you heard in the announcements, we do a monthly virtual letter writing project where we get together on Zoom and we write notes to those in need. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and so October we will be writing notes to our local battered women's shelter. And we will encourage our live stream audience to find that audience and that demographic in their area. The first place to start with any problem is to acknowledge it exists. And once we look at that problem in the face, then it begins to change how we engage the world. It begins to change how we read the papers. It begins to change what we pay attention to. It begins to change how we treat each other. You remember that statistic that we talked about earlier in the sermon? 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men have been victims of physical brutality. Friends, that means 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men that we know. Think about that. If nothing else today, I hope this message invites us to listen to the people around us more carefully, to hear their stories more carefully, to be aware of the signs or subtle pleas for help around us more carefully. Let the hatred cease. Let the enabling of hate through guns be no more. And let us be the ones that will start that change. I'm going to hand the ending of this sermon over to where it should be with our soprano, Samina Islam. She will be performing the beautiful Ave Maria that we talked about in the beginning. Just so you know, this piece in the opera comes in Act 4 at the end, where Desdemona is about to go to bed. She senses she's in danger. Her husband, Othello, is about to come in and kill her in the act of a domestic jealousy and violent act. And right before she goes to sleep, Desdemona sings this Ave Maria, ending with the words, Prego per noir, prego per noir, prego. Pray for us. Pray for us. Pray.